Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brandon Turbeville broadcasting from Mullins, South Carolina. I wanted to talk again on the Council of Governments and UN Agenda 21 issue that I mentioned in my last podcast. Has been the topic of some of my more recent articles for Activist Post. Before I do, let me go through the panhandling section of the broadcast and say that I am a staff writer for Activist Post. If you want to keep up with my work, you can go to activistpost.com. My articles are up there frequently, and you can find them on the homepage when they do come out. But you can also go to the Contributors tab, click on that tab, find my name, click on my name, and a page of all of my articles, or a lot of my articles, not all of them, but plenty of them, enough of them to keep you busy if you want to read my articles specifically. I'm also the author of 4 books: 7 Real Conspiracies, Codex, Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, 5 Cent Solutions, and Dispatches from a Dissident, Volume 1. Now, you can purchase those at thebookpatch.com, which I encourage you to do. Just go to thebookpatch.com. You can search the titles, or you can search my name, and the books should come up. You could also go to falseflagpublications.blogspot.com, and I'll have each of the books listed. There'll be a picture of the book and a Buy Now button above and below the books, so you can click on those buttons. They'll take you directly to the store. Also, if you want to keep up to date on the articles that I've been writing, I have brandonturbeville.blogspot.com, where I repost all of my articles and all of my interviews and all of my podcasts. But bear in mind that if you want to keep up with my work in real time, then you should go to activistpost.com. I usually update my Blogspot page 2 to 3 days after my articles get posted on Activist Post. So, to move back to the Council of Government issue that we talked about last time, I wanted to go over the article, the second article that I wrote in regards to the Council of Governments. It's entitled, As Above, So Below, Local Council of Governments Implementing UN-Directed Agenda 21. If you want to find that article, you can probably just Google it. It should be up on Activist Post page, again, that contributor tab that I mentioned earlier. Or you could just Google the title of the article with my name, and it should pull it up. But I was going to go over this briefly and talk about the relationship between the Council of Governments, also known as COGs, the COG, not to be confused with continuity of government in the martial law sense, but COGs as Council of Governments. I want to talk about the COG, the COGs relationship with Agenda 21, with ICLEI, and with other so-called sustainability programs. Now, I want to preface what I'm saying when I talk about sustainability, and I speak of sustainability in a negative sense. It's really unfair that individuals have hijacked this term sustainability. I am 100% in support of sustainability and sustainable development. However, these terms have been co-opted, and now sustainability and sustainable development are simply code words for population reduction, megacities, herding human beings into human habitat areas, and rewilding everything else, and only letting the natural areas of the world, the wilderness areas that survived the Agenda 21 planning, only letting those areas survive for the benefit of the very rich who want to go out and enjoy themselves out in nature. So that needs to be stated, that the term, that there's nothing wrong with sustainability. We tend to have a reaction. We tend to react rather than respond when we hear terms like sustainable development, after they've been co-opted and used to represent something that would be detrimental to every human being on the planet. And we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we say that we don't want anything to do with sustainability. Well, that's not the way it should be. We should absolutely intend to grow food in a sustainable fashion, sustainable farming. We should plan our cities in a sustainable fashion. Our environmental policy should be based on sustainability. For instance, we can't continue to throw our garbage in a hole in the ground and cover it up. That is not sustainable. We cannot continue to function by using oil, coal, and nuclear power. That is not sustainable. We have to go to sustainable energy, real sustainable energy, not wind, not even necessarily solar. There's other technologies out there that could be much more beneficial to the human population and to the environment in terms of developing energy. So we have to not succumb to the temptation to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say we're against sustainability, but we also have to be sophisticated enough to recognize that sustainable development, when it's being mentioned from a government source, from an eco-fascist source, that we know that sustainability is actually a code word for Agenda 21 and population reduction and human habitat areas and the whole program. Again, if you don't know what Agenda 21 is, then please put this broadcast on pause, go Google it, go research it now. In the last broadcast I did, I tried to plug the websites of Rosa Corey and Cassandra Anderson, which are Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com and morphcity.com respectively. These two individuals have done a tremendous amount of work in terms of explaining and presenting the evidence against Agenda 21, as so has Dr. Michael Kaufman. You should check his work out as well. But I want to jump right into this article and try to get some points across here in the time that we have. It says, in my last article entitled As Above, So Below, the Globalist Agenda Reflected in Local Politics Through Council of Governments, I highlighted how COGs have been embedded in virtually every state and every local community inside the United States. I described how the COG works within their own structure in order to implement UN-based plans at the national, state, and local levels. I attempted to provide an example of how the COG accomplishes their various initiatives through initiatives such as the penny sales tax program as being introduced all across the state of South Carolina. And again, I discussed that at length in my last article and especially in my last broadcast. Clearly, anyone who studies the COG, even briefly, can understand that decisions are being made outside of the normal democratic process. However, a direct connection between the COG and Agenda 21 UN-style programs is somewhat harder to find, at least at first glance. Nevertheless, the COG and the concept of UN-based sustainable development are indeed closely linked. In this regard, the California State COG, the California Association for Councils of Governments, the CalCOG, provides us with the most easily accessible information. Via the CalCOG website, and I have a link to this in my article, but you can just Google it, CALCOG, the California Councils of Government, it becomes apparent that the CalCOG has been instrumental for some time in furthering sustainable communities initiatives like California SB 375, which is the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act of 2008. In fact, the Regional Transportation Plan 2012 to 2035 section of the website with subsection Towards a Sustainable Future brags that the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, has been preparing regional transportation plans since 1976. Again, I mentioned in my last broadcast that the councils of the government have been in existence since the late 1960s. Now, I should also mention that I apologize to the listener and to the reader to some extent of this inherent inability to explain without using diagrams the structure of the councils of governments and how they work and how they intertwine with these various different programs. It's just very difficult to do. It's a very tangled web. Again, the councils of government, or at least the Southern California Association of Governments, has actually been preparing the regional transportation plans since 1976. This is admitted on their webpage, and again I have a link to that in the article. It's in the section Towards a Sustainable Future. Thus, it might be interesting to note that some of the goals listed for the regional transportation plans by the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, include, and this is a quote, encouraging active transportation, non-motorized transportation, such as bicycling and walking, unquote, and more importantly, to, quote again, encourage land use and growth patterns that facilitate transit and non-motorized transportation, unquote. Here, the reader can see once again another trend of encouraging non-motorized transportation that coincidentally tends to be taking place all over the rest of the country as well, particularly in major cities. To be clear, however, this writer is not suggesting that creating systems of transit that facilitate walking, cycling, or public transportation is inherently evil. This is not the case. Without a doubt, such travel systems should be made available. However, we must understand that whatever small and largely temporary benefits that may result from the COG system is only a part of a larger agenda, and that these benefits are indeed only of a transitory nature. That's exactly right. And that's what I was speaking about a second ago. We have to be sophisticated enough to not throw the baby out with the bathwater when we talk about sustainable development. But we also have to be sophisticated enough not to run into the arms of individuals who are making these plans. For instance, if you've been to a major city and experienced the congestions, you know that it would be so much better for the people who live in that city to have a robust public transportation system that services and businesses and so forth were within walking distance. Now, I'm not saying that they should be zoned in that manner, but it's important that they be in walking distance. Cycling should be promoted where possible. But just because of the issues that you face, that does not mean that you have to run into the arms of the Agenda 21 proponents who promise you better public transportation, more cycling, more walking, and give up so many more things that are worth much more than public transportation. Again, we have to be very sophisticated in what we in the way we look at things here. Thus, the second point regarding the statement, quote, encourage land use and growth patterns that facilitate transit and non-motorized transportation, unquote, is very important because it is here that we see the hallmark of Agenda 21, the creation of a transportation system that discourages the use of motor vehicles and private transportation. Indeed, such a transportation system places a heavy burden upon rural communities and is only one step in choking off the lifeline that allows them to exist in a functional manner. This was the focus of an article that I've done probably 2 to 3 months back, and I think the title of it was South Carolina Moves to Implement Agenda 21. You could Google that in some capacity. You could probably pull it back up. It was my first exposure to the South Carolina Councils of Government, where the state government, South Carolina state government, was trying to pass a law. It was essentially a resolution that would go to the South Carolina Councils of Government in order to close down shopping malls as city centers, mixed-use city centers. And they also wanted to place a higher burden on the rural communities under this ridiculous justification that rural communities cost more than urban communities. Back to the article. The COG also appears to have been involved in California's cap-and-trade scheme implemented under the 2006 California legislation AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act. Such a scheme designed to reduce industry and increase the cost of energy for businesses and individuals alike is taking shape all across the world, and the reasons for supporting it from a globalist and or eugenicist perspective are legion. At the very least, COG seems to have recognized the cap-and-trade scheme as a great source of revenue for future pet projects funneled down to them from the shadowy forces that form international policy. In this instance, however, it is easy enough to deduce that revenue generation was a secondary concern at best. First and foremost are the UN-based mandates that will inevitably chase billions of people out of rural areas and into cities even as industry disappears and the energy costs, which are a necessary component to any urban society, skyrocket out of reach for all but the super rich. Again, if you want a clear example, California already has, as you just heard, the Global Warming Solutions Act. California already has a cap-and-trade scheme. But if you want to see what happens at a national level, take a look at Australia and what's going on in Australia with Julia Gillard of Australia, with the implementation of cap-and-trade schemes and carbon taxes. And they're actually making it illegal to criticize the carbon taxes in Australia. If you want to see how far eco-fascism can go and will go and is going if someone doesn't do something about it now. Australia is only a test case. Of course, none of this does anything for the environment. Global warming is a farce. It's always been a farce. CO2 has nothing to do with it. For years, much of this type of public-private UN-based activism has been openly conducted by organizations like the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, that's ICLEI, also known as Local Governments for Sustainability. ICLEI is an organization that is made up of over 1,000 local governments, the majority being from the United States, who have bypassed federal and state law as well as the Constitution in order to implement Agenda 21 policies. Indeed, most major cities inside the United States are now signed on to ICLEI. As Cassandra Anderson of MorphCity.com writes in her article, quote, the article is ICLEI invasive in 600 American cities, she says. ICLEI institutes the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Treaty that was withdrawn from a vote on the Senate floor in 1994, so the treaty designed for UN control is being implemented in cities. I'll read that one more time. ICLEI institutes the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Treaty that was withdrawn from a vote on the Senate floor in 1994, so the treaty, designed for UN control, is being implemented in cities. It's an end run around the Constitution. It's an end run around the legal process. You see what's happening via ICLEI. The federal government couldn't pass the treaty, couldn't pass the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Treaty. So the cities unite with ICLEI, 600 American cities, and they do it on their own through local laws, local policy, local zoning boards, and that sort of thing, local taxes. And the COG plays a major role in this. ICLEI's own website is quite open about their goals. It states, and here I'm going to read from the website, International goals. Our programs and projects promote participatory, long-term strategic planning processes that address local sustainability while protecting global common goods. This approach links local action to internationally agreed upon goals. Again, this approach links local action to internationally agreed upon goals and targets, such as Agenda 21, the Rio Conventions, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. ICLEI admits that these treaties, these programs, these plans are being implemented at the local level. Anderson has also conducted an interview with Richard Rothschild, the first county commissioner to officially oppose the United Nations International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. Rothschild recounted some of the provisions that prompted him to oppose ICLEI early on, one of which being the proposal having to do with city centers, stacked urban dwellings, and pedestrian and bicycle-accessible city centers. Of course, this plan is virtually identical to the plan being implemented by the COG in California and other COGs all across the country. Now, I should mention here, in watching that interview, it was asked initially whether Richard Rothschild was kin to the Rothschild banking dynasty. And he claims that no, he is not in any way related to those Rothschilds. I mention that because I know what is going through the minds of the listeners right now. When I mentioned the name, it was going through mine. Back to the article. I myself wrote an article entitled South Carolina Moves to Implement Agenda 21 Guidelines, where I addressed the same plan which was being presented to South Carolinians at the state level by the South Carolina State Legislature in conjunction with the South Carolina Council of Government. Although many COG members and government officials would have members of the public believe that this is mere coincidence, such a suggestion is entirely laughable. COGs at the national, state, and local levels are introducing and implementing plans which are identical to those being introduced and implemented by ICLEI. More often than not, these plans are introduced with exactly the same language. With so many intertwining boards, councils, and commissions crossing between government, business, NGOs, foundations, COGs, ICLEI, and other organizations, there is little wonder how so much can be accomplished so fast with absolutely no fanfare to accompany it. Yet, while most of the relationships between COG and ICLEI remain thoroughly undercover, some are becoming much more open. For instance, it was announced in July 2011 that the Central Midlands COG of South Carolina and the Triangle J COG of North Carolina had officially become ICLEI affiliates. The ICLEI USA blog wrote the following. Again, I'm going to read from their blog. ICLEI is pleased to welcome 2 regional affiliates to the Southeast region. Hailing from the capital region of South Carolina, Central Midlands Council of Government serves 4 counties: Fairfield, Lexington, Newberry, and Richland. Recently, Central Midlands COG released an RFP for a regional sustainability plan covering Richland and Lexington counties, as well as Columbia, South Carolina's capital, and longtime ICLEI member. ICLEI tools and resources such as the Sustainability Planning Toolkit will help Central Midlands COG develop a strong and effective plan. Triangle J COG serves a 7-county region, including North Carolina's capital, Raleigh, seeing a trend here, and has the clever comment, by the way, was actually in the blog. That wasn't my own addition. It has been active in the region's sustainability conversations for some time now. Similar to Central Midlands COG, Triangle J is starting the process to develop a regional climate action plan. The plan will focus on developing the clean energy economy, for which the Triangle region is already well positioned with its leading research institutions and manufacturers in smart grid, biofuels, and LED lighting. The smart grid. The clean energy economy focus aligns well with other projects Triangle J is working on with ICLEI. Triangle J COG was one of 4 national awardees of Green Business Challenge implementation packs. This will be the first regional Green Business Challenge and will provide recognition and guidance for businesses in the region to reduce the energy use and green their operations. Triangle J COG facilitates the Council for a Sustainable Triangle, a group of sustainability directors from local governments, universities, and corporations in the region. Triangle J's regional work with ICLEI will enhance the programs already being undertaken by the several ICLEI members in the region. So in other words, it's pretty clear here, but the COGs will implement the ICLEI Agenda 21 Global Agreement on the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Rio Convention. The COG will implement these plans in concert with ICLEI. And also notice too that the blog mentions not only local governments but corporations and universities. We all know the corporations are on board, but the universities are totally on board as well. We tend to have a view, or some of us do, or some of us did, of the university being a cradle of revolution because of the 60s, or the perception of what happened during the 60s. But I can assure you, the university, if it's cradle for a revolution, it's not cradle for your side of the revolution. Obviously, the open partnership between the COG and ICLEI is not isolated to the Carolinas alone. In October 2010, the Northwest Michigan COG became an affiliate of ICLEI as well. These are not likely to be the only open COG or ICLEI affiliates, and they will certainly not be the last. However, the main point that needs to be understood is that the relationship need not be official to be effective. As I mentioned earlier, COGs have been implementing and introducing the very same legislation and policy as ICLEI since their inception. Clearly, the COGs are just one more undercover arm of the international elite that wish to cage human society with smart grid technology, stacked city dwelling, and a significantly reduced population. If the anti-Agenda 21 activists have been at odds for a target in their local communities, they now need to look no further than their local council of governments. And that's what I'm trying to get out here through these broadcasts, is that if you want to oppose Agenda 21, if you want to oppose UN control of the United States, of your state, of your city, of your county, then you can go after the UN, and you should do that. You should go after ICLEI, and you should go after the Agenda 21 policies as they're stated in terms of concepts. But you also have something right here on the ground. You have something right here in your local area, right here in your city, in your town, and it's being implemented by either corrupt local officials, corrupt local individuals, or willful idiots, or just total idiots. Doesn't necessarily make a difference. Implementation is implementation, whether by a genius or an idiot. It still yields the same results. This is something you can fight. This is something you can bring out to your fellow citizens, your fellow members, your fellow your neighbors. You can bring this out to them. You can explain to them what the Council of Governments actually do. And trust me, most people have no idea that these things even exist. You can go to the meetings. The Council of Government meetings are actually public. You can go in there and you can sit and you can watch. You'll probably be the only one. Now, as this information gets out further and further, this may change, and the individuals involved in the COG might become less enthusiastic about sharing information with you. I have seemed to run up against that myself when I've tried to get information about the COG in recent times. It's been significantly more difficult once these two articles came out. But nevertheless, this is something that you must absolutely take a look at if you want to see how Agenda 21 is being implemented in your community. Not in the open, but not outright in the open. It's all done in secret. No one's even noticed that Agenda 21 is being implemented around them. They're not announcing that they're implementing Agenda 21 to you on their website, but who checks their website? Instead, they create zoning regulations, municipal codes, local laws that direct you into the city centers and pull you off of the land. And all the while you think that it's a policy that was created by your local leaders, local businessmen, or that it was an organic change. It's not organic. Again, the article is As Above, So Below, Local Council of Governments Implementing UN-Directed Agenda 21. That's at Activist Post. My name is Brandon Turbeville. You can Google that title with my name, and you should be able to find the article relatively easily. We should have some more broadcasts here in the future, and until then, just keep going to Activist Post, activistpost.com, checking on the articles that are coming out there on a daily basis. It's a great website to go to in any event.